of the courthouse, the CJCC meeting will be held in the EOC for the foreseeable future. A little housekeeping about the meeting space and the restrooms are located down the hall where you entered. I want to pass on information to those that are attending by Zoom. We ask that all members on Zoom, please turn on video if you have it. We ask that all members on Zoom mute their line when not speaking. We ask that you please identify yourself each time you speak. If you are on Zoom and have a public comment to make during the public comment section of the agenda, please raise your hand on the raise your hand function on Zoom. Recordings of CJCC meetings are available on the CJCC website after each meeting. Our first agenda item today is the CJCC Bylaws Work Group Update and Progress Report. Let's let Katie take it over.
Okay, so I remember. Hopefully, line Carrie will let us know. So I'm briefly going to introduce this agenda item, and then turn this over to the work group members to talk more about as most of y'all should recall, back in January, following the JMI assessment and recommendations of the CJCC, we proposed forming a work group to work through revising bylaws of the CJCC. That work group members, the members of that, or just to remember that, sorry, it looks funky on the screen over there, was D.A. Valdez, who's the chair of the work group, Sheriff Armbruster, who's the vice chair. We have Jessica Glendenning, chief defender from BIDS, Lori Alvarado, CEO of DECA, Doris Ricks, our District 1 BOCC appointee on the CJCC, City Commissioner Brad Finkeldye, and County Commissioner Shannon Reed. So this group, so my introduction to this, I just want to kind of lay the groundwork for folks and share about what this group has been doing and the process that they've been working through. And then they are going to walk through kind of the content of what revisions they are suggesting to you all today. If you have a packet, all of the what they're going to be walking through is actually in the packet here. So as a timeline, after the January meeting, CJCC members were asked to provide feedback about what perspectives would be important for this work group. What were some of the deliverables or particular tasks that that were important to CJCC members for this work group to address through their work on the bylaws. That feedback was shared with me, and kind of I pulled together what a work group that seemed to fit those and started working on a draft charter. So this work group came together first at the very end of February to review the charter and the feedback that you all provided about what y'all would like to see them work on. In the March CJCC meeting, the charter and the work group was introduced to you all. And immediately after that meeting, this work group really kicked into high gear and started working. So this group has met several times on the slides, and these will be available after the meeting. I've listed out all of the meetings that this group's had so far, and then we have a couple other meetings scheduled after this to work through developing finished revision of these proposed bylaws. So I share this just to, like, this work group's been doing a lot in a fairly short amount of time. Each of the meetings of this work group were really guided by and grounded in the national standards of CJCCs, which is a document that was published in May of 2023 by the Justice Management Institute in partnership with the National Institute of Corrections. The national standards document is also the basis for the essential elements assessment that JMI completed with us last fall. Additionally, each of the work group meetings were also guided by the charter that you all approved of this work group and focused on the deliverables and the areas of focus that were particularly of interest to you. Also, this work group, I spent a lot of time in kind of providing materials in preparation for their meetings, every possible CJCC that I could find online that had, their bylaws available. I was providing kind of a created, kind of a living document that was updated, as they worked through the different components of different examples. So I was providing examples of mission statements from kind of across the country, membership responsibilities, strategic planning, kind of all of those components of our bylaws. I was providing various examples to the work group for them to consider and kind of think about, does this work for us? Do we like this part? Do we not like this part? Do we want to start totally over here? So I share that this work group was really grounded in a lot of principles and kind of evidence and work from other places. So it wasn't just kind of fly by night things that people made up. This group really started with, and kind of a key place for this group to start was establishing a mission, vision, and purpose statements around the CJCC. CJCC members received a draft of this section. So this is like sections 1, 2, and 3 of the bylaws. We sent this out in mid-April for feedback. Thank you to those of you who sent feedback back. And I would share that the process for that the work group has gone through so far has really been, it's been very iterative. We would have lots of conversation about, generally Christy and I would bring up topics, or we would kind of lay out topics and prompts. The work group would share their feedback. Not always, everyone was not always in agreement. So there was lots of discussion and working through feedback around those topics. They would generally reach either some consensus or say, can direct me to them, provide a draft of, based on their thoughts, what does this look like on paper? So I would draft those, send them back to the work group for them to kind of see and react to. Then there was more discussion about, nope, that's not really what we thought it was going to be, or yes, that's exactly, let's move on. So this was a very iterative process and a very, kind of time intensive. The meetings were pretty fast paced. And so I share that I think it's important that you all know these draft bylaws, as they stand right now, which they are not complete. We'll talk about that on the next slide, but they come to you all after very intentional and thoughtful and very purposeful conversation over a long period of a fairly short period of time, but it feels like kind of a long time. So there was there's been a lot of thought and effort that has gone into these so far. This shows up funny on the slide, but there's a copy that is in the packet of, this was also sent out. It was highlighted a little different because we've made progress since the last time CJCC members saw this. At the beginning, for me at least, this was really overwhelming to look at all of the components that the standards say should be included in the bylaws, and to look at our meeting schedule and say, how are we going to accomplish, how are we going to do this? And I think seeing this on paper, some of the work group members also said this is a lot in a short amount of time. But this was one of the, initially when we started this, these are all of the components as they're called out in the standards. So some of these headings are not going to be how they like translate exactly the same, but a short overview of what that section refers to, a link to the primary standards. And then in this last column this was the schedule that this work group had laid out. So each of these were covered at different meeting topics. The two that are highlighted in orange here, the work group has not yet gotten to. So we recognize these are still pending. And they're not part of the presentation today. But I provided a copy of this just because it looks weird. It kind of didn't quite translate exactly in the slides. So the work group at this point, so I wanted to share, I thought it's important for you all to just kind of have a sense of how we got to here. And then at this point, the work group members have divvied up all of the sections, and they're going to kind of walk through the different kind of highlights of the changes that they've made, that they've suggested so far. This is also in the packet that you all have. And
so maybe before you hand it over, I just wanted to let everyone know how much of the heavy lifting Katie did for the group. She had
this sheet showed you, we met, I don't know, 6 or 7 times for an hour and 30 minutes, sometimes longer. There were a couple times we went for a couple hours because we were kind of engrossed in what we were doing, but we always had an agenda. We always had, we did reinvent the wheel. So we just want to let you all know that. We looked at what other CJCCs are doing across the country and we try to make it our own. So anyway, I just wanted to give a shout out to Katie because without her help and without her keeping us on track, I mean, everyone's busy in this work group, but she kept us on task and she kept us moving along, and I think we made a lot of progress, so.
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And also this, y'all did a lot too in between. And I would say too, just one thing that really stands out for me, as staff, not just in this role, but in previous roles. We've had for almost every meeting, I think we had every single person, attend, even when people were on vacation and they logged in virtually, which was really appreciated.
On the beach,
Um,
we all just-
Like, yes, like on
Came
the
back.
beach vacation. But we had everyone, people adjusted schedules and made accommodations to join either virtually or in person. For almost every meeting, which is, from my perspective, I think speaks to the commitment that this group had to follow through with the task and the charge that you all as CJCC kind of gave them. So I think, Jay, you are up first.
I am. So, we're just gonna kind of break it down piece by piece and talk a little bit about how we got to where we are. But the first section is the authority. Obviously, it's derived from the original building of this council in 2016 by the Board of County Commission through Douglas County. But what we really wanted to kind of drive home here was the way that this council was built, and we want to continue to operate it, is that this council is a advisory board. We have no legal authority as a council to direct any agency or any group or any person on what they should or should not do. We have a section in here where it says elected and appointed officials have the authority to implement such recommendations as they deem appropriate. And no vote or recommendation shall be binding on any member or agency without their express consent. We do have provisions in here that talk about voting, but those anywhere you see where it talks about voting, it'd be more for procedural matters for the council itself as opposed to actions. Well, so maybe I'm skipping ahead, I'm sorry. But the authority is pretty clear, but we just wanted to kind of build everything off of the simple basis is that we are an advisory council at its core.
Okay, so in addition to that, good afternoon, to everyone. In addition to that, we all understand that it is very vital and it's very important to the heartbeat of the CJCC is to have a vision and a mission statement. So we looked at the vision statement and we made a few changes in language to the vision statement. You know, we want to make sure that everyone in Lawrence feels a just and equitable experience for all that reduces that criminal justice footprint and enhances public safety for Douglas County. But in visiting not only just the vision, but the mission statement, the conversation at the table and looking at the standards across the country that Katie provided us, helped us to understand what it is we want to see within our community, right? So the last portion of the mission statement, I really like because we changed a lot of the language there, making sure that we're a criminal legal system, making sure also that everyone understands it's all by recommendation, right? Everything is by recommendation. We want to make sure that we're pulling in all of the right stakeholders in this partnership. So we try to make sure we put that in the mission statement. Also, along with the guiding principles, we made sure we changed some language there. You know, we put healing for victims and survivors. softening that language as well, right? To make everyone feel very good about the community in which he or she, or however you would like to identify, want to live and have that expectation.
The responsibilities are kind of laid out and they speak for themselves. And I'm not going to sit here and read them to you, but basically our responsibility is to just assist and direct and guide the folks here at the table and online, of course, that all have a piece of the criminal justice system. But then it also goes into, how we're gonna use data, how we're gonna use expertise as far as stakeholders, as well as lived experience and all of the things that we need to make the right decisions.
And then section 4, you'll see A, B, and C. We're still working through. We've had some conversations, but we're not there yet. So those will be in our future meetings. We tackled D because that felt like we could tackle that one pretty easily. Kind of standard conflict of interest, but we do think we need to shore up some things a little bit. We'll likely be asking members to actually identify their conflicts of interest and potential conflicts of interest. We all have them. And we would ask that we have members identify those and then even call those out as recommendations are being made, just so that everybody's clear what those conflicts are. So I don't think this will be anything that's weird to you all. It's pretty standard. But we did tackle that part of that section and we'll tackle the rest in our upcoming meetings.
So section 5 sets out the officer positions and what their duties will be. The biggest change that we've made here is that we have brought back a vice chair position. There was a vice chair position previously, but that was removed in the most recent version passed in 2019. So this section brings back that vice chair position and it sets out the specific duties of the chair and vice chair so that that's clear. We also have set out what the selection process would be for those two positions. And we spent quite a bit of time discussing how to make the election process work for those two positions. Given that some of our CJCC positions are elected positions, and so we have to kind of account for the election cycle when we're looking at these positions. So what we placed in here was that we would have elections in the December meeting that would take place during that meeting, both nominations and elections. We've decided that the easiest way to deal with that is to place the CJCC meetings on even numbered months. Right now, we're doing odd numbered months, which gets messy for a couple of reasons, including the July budget time period makes that July meeting difficult. So one thing that we wanted to kind of bring to people's attention is that we're anticipating elections would occur in December of this year for the 2025 year. And because we're still working on bylaws and planning on, and I think Katie will talk about this more, but we're going to request a special meeting in June. We may want to consider, do we want to change the meeting timeframes up starting with that June date? So we wanted to kind of flag that for folks and have that on people's radar.
Section 6 then is the executive committee, which is supposed to be expected to be the chair and the vice chair. But we decided to add a member at large to that committee as the executive committee. And the chair and the vice chair will be elected to 2-year terms, but the member at large will be a 1-year term because we wanted just to be able to, make sure that as things go on, we have the ability to at least have some influence, on a year-to-year basis for that executive committee. And then obviously we line out the duties of that executive committee, and I think they're all pretty standard for what an executive committee would do, but they become more of the basically working with our coordinator, Katie, and setting up the meetings and obviously working through all those issues as most executive committees would do.
The next section, next part of that section is standing committees and work groups. We did have some conversation about work groups and what would be standing and what wouldn't. We decided not to call out specific committees' names, because if we call them out and then we decide we don't want them, we have to go through a bylaws change. So I will tell you what we did a lot is provide guidance versus specifics, because we don't want to be in a position where we're changing bylaws every time we change a committee. So there will be standing committees, there will be work groups, and I want to spend a little bit of time on section B, the creation of that. We've envisioned that the executive committee, two things will guide the work groups and the committees: our strategic plan, and then the executive team kind of like suggesting, recommending, these are the committees that we think will be helpful to accomplish the tasks in the strategic plan. So we believe that our work groups ought to be focused on outcomes that this group is trying to accomplish. So those will be developed by the executive committee and made to recommendation for the rest of the CJCC membership. This is an opportunity for us to engage other people in this work. This is an opportunity for us to get subject matter expertise, other expertise that we need on these committees. We envision the committees doing lion's share of the work and fleshing out some of those recommendations, fleshing out the evidence-informed work that we want to do, making those recommendations to the CJCC. So those committees, we also would envision evaluating those on a regular basis. The executive committee would do that. We want to be clear that when work is done by a committee, that committee is thanked and celebrated, and maybe we don't need it anymore. Nobody needs extra meetings. So really kind of managing the work group and the committee structure. That'll happen through the executive team as well. I think we just want to make sure that all of this committee work aligns with what is outlined in our strategic plan, which you'll also hear a little bit about here in just a few minutes.
Okay, so, that was a very good way of kind of a segue into the strategic plan. So we spent some time talking about, the great thing about our work group is that we've had Lori Alvarado's been on the CJCC since its inception. So just kind of hearing from her and how the CJCC has kind of, gone about its business, through the last many years and in different iterations. We really wanted to focus on making sure that the work that we do is meaningful, as she mentioned, that we're really looking at what's happening in our community and really working on things that can make a difference, and that we show a plan for that, and then have a report indicating what we've done. So those two, I'm glad I get to talk about. The strategic planning process, we talked about a 3-year, a 4-year, even a 5-year strategic plan sort of process. We settled on 3 years. Just based on a lot of different variables, electives and people moving on from different jobs, but just to keep things fresh. And so that strategic plan will be out there for all of us to sort of work on and publish, and the bylaws talk about that. This, I think, helps with transparency, so it looks like we have goals that we're working toward. And we will begin development of a strategic plan in August. The annual reports will be done, of course, annually, and it'll take into consideration sort of our strategic plan, the things that we're working on, and reporting to the public, I believe, in March. But that, again, is an effort to be transparent and to sort of guide us to make sure that we're kind of getting the work done that we've been talked about through our work groups and involving community members and expertise whenever we need it.
And the last two sections, section 9 and 10 are CJCC staff and amending bylaws. Changes to these were primarily added to add clarity and consistency to existing sections. For the staff responsibilities, it's just sort of a brief paragraph that speaks to the fact that Katie currently in her role, and anybody else who might be in that role in the future, that is supervised by the county administrator, is who will really work to coordinate the CJCC still and work with the executive committee in things like agenda building and sort of strategic planning. And that will be an iterative process. And then the amending bylaws just lays out a structure to do that at least, to review bylaws at least every 5 years, and have a process. They've already been reviewed a few times, and updated. I'd say this is the most substantial update, of the bylaws, and really try to, be quite clear in the national standards. I think offered us a lot of really good guidance. And as has been mentioned about Katie, a good example of, you know, her role that we wanted to sort of codify in these bylaws, was how she, helped support this support group, through the process and really doing the sort of the nuts and bolts, work of it and bringing it back to us so that we could, get to a consensus about language and direction. But she sort of did the heavy lifting and the making and the cross-referencing with other CJCCs, which I think is an important piece to highlight about staff's role as a county commissioner, to say that that's a big goal for me. That staff's role is sort of tuned into what's happening on a national level, a regional level, and a local level, and able to sort of make sure that our CJCC is functioning with regard to our bylaws, but that as we're reviewing bylaws over time, that we are able to sort of get a temperature reading and assess what's happening on a regional and national level. Also, if standards have changed, that we've got a good guide for that. So that was just sort of my editorial commentary about that. But I, you know, since that's the end of the draft bylaws, I think that's an important piece that will help us just revisit with regularity. If anything really needs to significantly change, and gives us an opportunity, especially for new CJCC members as membership changes over time, to get particularly familiar with the bylaws. We all, when we get appointed to groups or when we step into a role, onto a group and we get bylaws and an orientation, you absorb that information and then you absorb a whole lot more information. So I think that this is an important piece for us to be able to revisit with intention and make sure that, that they're functioning as they're supposed to, that we're following the bylaws, and that we've been able to flag if anything is not functioning well. Process. I'll turn it back to you.
One thing I had meant to mention earlier when, all of the work group members have referenced, that, you know, looking across other CJCCs for, as examples or, there was a lot of similarity across all CJCC's bylaws, in some places, but, there were it was important for Christy to kind of keep reminding me, and I think at times, the work group had to kind of remind itself that these standards have barely been published for a year. And so looking across other, as I looked at other examples, I'd pull them up. There's not been much time for a lot of CJCCs to really update their bylaws in accordance with the new standards. And there's a lot of commentary and detail in the standards document that we were really tasked with kind of getting into a lot of weeds in places. And so there are places here where there wasn't good examples to go back to address some of the in the weeds things. And so that's just another, I just feel like that's an important note that ours will be one of the first, I might not the first probably, but it will be one of the first that we'll see kind of coming out that should be really aligned with that people should be able to take this document and kind of draw direct lines back into the standards. But there were places here where we had to kind of go out on a limb and say, well, okay, we're going to do it this way. We're going to suggest this, knowing that we didn't really have a good example of, well, how did Charleston do that? Because Charleston didn't have the standards yet the last time they looked at their bylaws. So, so those kind of the highlight, that's a very, in the grand scheme of things, short summary of kind of all of the work that this group has done over the many hours, not just in meetings, but in between times, that have resulted in this document that you've seen so far. The ask of the work group today, I think we would kind of like to open it up for feedback around some of the parts in here that have been drafted. So knowing that we have, and I think Lori had mentioned, one of y'all mentioned, so after this meeting we've kind of worked through some, there's some questions and some kind of prompts in those other two sections that we haven't gotten to yet that, we will be seeking additional feedback on that from you all after this meeting, but this was a lot of information that at least we kind of like to get, feedback or reactions to these sections today. If folks have them,
I think we're interested. Do we have to go back to the drawing board? Are there areas that you think we need to reconsider? Yeah, things that we have missed because we've been in the middle of it, maybe too much. So that when we meet, we cover everything that we need to address versus, as well as the ones that we've not quite fleshed out yet.
I have a thought about King's, maybe a more neutral posture with respect to the vision, or 3A. I think use is a word that connotes a assessment of what currently exists, something, a certain direction needs to happen. So I might suggest, instead of reduce, we can put analyze or critically review or balance with public safety expectations, so that we understand there's always an assessment ongoing between those two things. There's an inherent tension in that when you have a system that imposes laws on people. Just reduce just struck me as a statement of something that isn't necessarily always going to be the case. It may be, we need to adjust. We need to adjust one way or the other, not just necessarily the only observation I have.
Just curious to the word. You know, I think we were trying to do that a little bit with enhanced public safety. Did that enhance strike you as the long road word there too? And then
Well, so enhance, again, strikes me as,
yeah, that's what I was wondering.
so the edit I made was a just and equitable experience for all that critically reviews the criminal justice footprint with public safety expectations in Douglas County, because I also think each community decides for itself what expectations they have about certain things.
That's
So
good.
I would take enhance out of the equation as well.
Okay.
So Judge, then you use critical review instead of analyze, right?
Just and equitable experience for all that critically reviews the criminal justice footprint with public safety expectations in Douglas County.
Kind of like the word balance, would that do the same as opposed to critically review?
One of the alternatives I wrote
I
down.
don't know, just critically review just gets cumbersome, but yeah. Yeah.
the reactions.
We'll let you know.
Just a lot smaller on the last page on the amending the bylaw. We would say will be voted on by the full CJCC membership. That's, I want to say, like yearly scheduled meeting with a. We've had times where this group has had vacant members and I don't want to hold things up because we're trying to make an appointment or positions in transition. So I guess my assumption is that it would be voted on at a regularly scheduled meeting with a quorum.
So it would just be instead of the full, it'd be the quorum.
Instead of a full CJCC membership, sounds like we got.
Sounds like we have to have everybody there.
Yeah, we gotta track them down to vote, and if we have vacancies, that just might be hard. I just think it's maybe something to talk about when we talk about membership. Yeah, just to also talk about quorum.
Yep, we have that on our list to talk about.
Okay.
Yep.
Are you also gonna talk about attendance?
Yeah.
Like.
That's on our list as well. Yep.
Point about finding-
About the guiding principles, there is conversation around centering folks with lived expertise. Is that just assumed and applied in informing, involving the community, putting diverse perspectives? I think that lived experience and expertise is, aside from that, it's a very specific type of input that I think is incredibly valuable, and I wonder if maybe, I call it an expert, but lived experience of the same vein. Was that the attempt, or is it worthy to elaborate on that?
So all of the bullets there, are actually the guiding principles that JMI has established for CJCCs. But the narrative part above that, was language that we drafted, but I think that, is a point we can go back and try to better address. So those are actually just how, as JMI introduces and kind of talks about CJCCs as a model across the country, that is how they have laid those out. But that, I think that's worth going back to, taking back
I
to,
think if it
to
fits
talk
in the
to.
narrative, that makes sense to me, but I think if we could highlight that, it's very important.
Got it.
So no, I don't think that we really, address that in the
No, but I
narrative. So
noted
we-
it.
Yeah, and I think that's a note in our membership discussion.
Mhm. Yeah, that is
Set
topic.
how we define that, the language that we're using for that, which I think might very well link us back to that guiding principle section in particular, and the responsibilities to see how the language is,
Tracks,
how it tracks.
Mhm.
So thank you.
No, thank you.
I think Jay talked about voting and it being for the purpose of.
Yeah, you got ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
We haven't
That-
included.
I was gonna say, I didn't see it.
No,
either.
yeah.
Oh,
We haven't got there yet.
I was
Yeah.
like.
Little sneak peek.
I'm like.
Spoiler.
I like the clarification, but I'm like, I'm not seeing it anywhere.
No. That's part of, that's part of the section 7.
Quorum and voting.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, sorry. I just.
But what he did share was essentially kind of the spirit of, I think some of the brief conversations that this group has had and how CJCCs in general kind of view voting on primarily procedural issues. So things related to, like amendments to bylaws or,
Chair,
voting
vice
on
chair,
like
yeah.
officer positions, but not necessarily related to, are we going to, everything else is generally consensus. But so he gave you a sneak peek. of What probably,
I like
what probably the
Yeah, it's
consensus
serious
will be,
work.
but.
Yeah, that's awesome.
One of the areas though on membership, that's, I think we're gonna be doing a lot of talking about membership, because each CJCC that we looked at, their memberships are so all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is all over the place, and so I think the takeaway after looking at what all of these communities are doing is to figure out what works for our community, right? So that we can be functional and get the work done as an advisory council, and then, with the working groups and get other people involved that way versus membership. That's one area I think is gonna cause, a lot of time. We're gonna spend a lot of time on that, because it's just all over the place depending on what community, which is good, because each community kind of comes up with the stakeholders that they think need to be, part of the membership. But that's not to say that that means that the work isn't getting done with the working groups and all the things that really are good to the ground, if that makes sense.
I have a question on conflict of interest disclosure. First of all, I'm not sure I know what the word means.
That's not,
Okay.
that's not our word. I think.
It's funny,
Yeah,
it's the word.
Yeah, but disclosure. I was like, why this
I
word?
think we're,
But it,
Yeah.
what stood out to me about the definition is that it was a little bit more explicit than just financial. I'm not gonna forget the language of it, but
It's more inclusive than finance.
more inclusive than just a financial conflict of interest. But to your point, Sarah, it's it's not a common word, so maybe there's a couple different words to add in there that helps summarize better.
That was
So
a
we should look at
suggestion
some
I heard.
other
Yeah.
common language.
Wasn't that in the standards?
Yeah.
That's a standard word too. It came from the standards. We didn't invent it or pick it.
All right.
I think generally how that might show up at a CJCC is usually things like so like Sarah, if we were looking, as the county was looking at, maybe an RFP for a service that potentially Patrick or Lori might benefit from,
We need to,
that the
Cool.
CJCC was maybe think like grant applications, funding types of applications, they would not,
Advisory board, would they be?
they wouldn't be this is
CJCC
probably
not
never
going
gonna be,
Sure, I understand.
right, this is probably not gonna be a thing, that,
Okay, that's fine.
but we have to have it in case it is a thing.
I guess I'm trying to
it,
solve
it probably
this.
depends on if things change over time,
But if
like,
it's advisory so I guess that's what I wanna make clear, if we're doing the we'd have to amend the bylaws to say that it's a different type of group. Before this would really probably come into play. I mean, I'm fine with having it, I just
Yeah,
want us
we
to
just-
be really clear that this is not a body that applies for grants or does RFPs or does those types of
And
things.
since we don't vote on anything other than procedure.
I could see a time where we would, as a group, discuss, contracting with somebody for something. And, what's that?
recommend.
Well, recommend.
Recommend.
I just wanna be
If
clear,
the county hasn't done that before,
but the Board of County Commissioners.
Right.
have done it.
But we
But
still
if-
need to disclose if we,
if I
like,
was doing that work,
right,
I would have to disclose, and I might want to apply for this, or I am actively seeking it, or.
or my brother-in-law is the CEO of that company or whatever. Those are the kinds of things that.
So just being very clear, especially if it were along the lines of me trying to influence, and I think that whoever you pick, it must be a local company. Well, if there's only one local company, I shouldn't influence them, because that's the other part of it to me.
Right.
is I would have to be very careful to also watch what I say or how I influence the discussion or the recommendation, if I have interest in the outcome of it.
Decisions of the CJCC.
Well, but because we make recommendations, if we're making a recommendation, you want to know that the people who are involved in making that recommendation don't stand to profit from it or benefit from it in some way. So it's not that we're going to make a final decision that gives Patrick money. But if we're making a recommendation that then some other agency
Commission,
is
that makes sense.
using to decide, they should know whether one of the people involved in it had some outcome.
But Sarah, you're questioning the decision.
I think there's a lot of things first of all, like, we don't really have a process for, like, in the county for disclosure statements from committee members and boards, so I'm thinking about all of our boards and commissions. And do I have to prepare and house and review these with you all on a regular basis? So I'm mostly just worried about the administrative and bureaucracy part of it, and making sure that this group understands it, at least in how we past operated. I mean, every year, Bert Nash and DECA submit budget proposals, so does the court and the district attorney, and we're not declaring that. So I guess I just want, like, I guess I just want to be clear on what things you want to, what things are in the scope to be applied for by this policy and what things aren't. Just so that we're all clear, because I think sometimes we have conflict of interest statements and we use to make ourselves feel better and they don't really mean anything. So, I just think we need to clarify. And I get if it's a standard, and I think we as a group will need to figure out what that means. And what it's like.
It is a standard, so.
So
So we're gonna,
maybe they have advice for us on how this is used in other places. I don't know if it's a standard that they want, because I just, like, you guys just traditionally don't do RFPs, and so, like, I don't know that I'm trying to figure out a situation where you would need to declare, and, just so that we all understand.
It's good.
Yeah, and the way it's currently written, we can talk about it in terms of just declaring it. It could also be if there is, somebody has an interest that they disclose, maybe when executive committee is forming a committee to work on the thing that this person may have an interest in, then choose not to put them on the committee for that reason. So I don't think it needs to be overly bureaucratic. You have to like, write everything out a year in advance, but it's just really being cognizant of it and being transparent about if and when there is one of those interests that you do disclose it and you try to sort of shepherd the process along so that person doesn't unduly influence it.
So it would mostly, and I guess so then, I guess I was a little. And I think there's conflicts of interest, maybe not financial interest.
Mhm.
But conflicts of interest inherent in the justice system. So we're not talking about those, right? Like, in terms of.
Yeah.
Like, are you on a committee that wants to see everybody locked up? Or, I guess it seemed very financially related in a group that doesn't make a lot of financial decisions. So that's what I was just a little. I want us to be clear about, like, the state is in a different place than the defense. So, like, those are conflicts of interest, maybe little c, little I. But we're talking about big C and big I here, I guess, in terms of financial interest to someone who might do that as opposed to perspectives or interests of position.
Exactly, the pecuniary or the property interests more than the position that they're in.
Perspectives or.
Perspective.
Right.
Defining exactly what. Talking about.
Since financial property, I guess, didn't know, I just don't see a whole lot of that happening in this group. So maybe it's just a blanket statement to sort of say, if it were to ever happen, you're gonna do that, but.
So we're
I just-
covered.
Yeah.
Yeah,
CYA.
you just need to know that I guess I just don't, I'm not collecting statements from you every year with all of your tax forms. That's what I wanted to avoid.
Helpful to have the discussion though, because I wondered the same thought.
Do you guys have a time frame or timeline when you think you're gonna have the other two orange items or whatever color it was?
Whenever we can.
Okay, I mean, I was
By
just trying to
December,
figure
so
out
we
the
can vote.
timeline.
I'll, we can go back to the slides later if we need to, but, right now, our contract with JMI said that a revised set of bylaws was the other deliverable, in our contract with JMI last August, I believe, when we executed that. And that contract currently runs through June 30th. And so we would ideally like to have this to the Board of County Commissioners before June 30th. So one of the agenda items a little later was thinking about, I think Jessica had mentioned, we do have the work group has a couple more meetings on the books right now. We would ideally like to, part of that contract also includes a site visit, with Christie. And so kind of looking at June, it's a little cleaner to kind of complete the contract rather than through the timeline rather than kind of extending it. What we would like to do is to consider, we'd like for you all to consider having a special meeting in June on June 26th. So I've talked with a couple of people about that over the lunch hour. So just like 12 to 1, which is a Wednesday, so it is not a Tuesday. But if we have Christie here on site, the thought was it'd be, like, our contract is kind of limited with what she can do. So if we had a meeting, ideally, with the CJCC to look at the final, what we hope are the final draft of these, and get approval from the body, then we could go to the Board of County Commission. We're kind of targeting that evening's county commission meeting. That would be ideal, for us to finish this by June. Part of that is after, later today, when you all get an email, ask with like prompts, what will be really helpful is, feedback about these other kind of, and thoughts that you all may have around those other two, remaining sections. And so we talked a little bit, when we met yesterday, the work group talked a little bit about, kind of particular things that we're interested in getting feedback around. And so if you all, our ask would be that, when y'all get those, from me later, that y'all send feedback like in a week, so we can start compiling it and working through, starting to work towards that next sections. And we will be sending, similar to when we sent those initial couple sections out to folks, we will be sending, additional revisions out before that ideally that June 26th meeting, and we would ask that just to help kind of complete the process, for feedback on those. I spoke out on y'all's behalf, I'm sorry.
Good job.
I should have like tossed that to y'all first. So that's kind of our idea.
On June 25th.
Well, it makes sense to meet in June then. And the contract. Did we have any
I
other
do not know the
questions?
process.
I was curious, like,
We'll have to use whatever's in our laws to accept these.
Which well, it's to
Right.
so
schedule.
if you're limiting my position, I still vote to limit myself.
We haven't got through the logistics of it yet.
No,
But
but I believe the logistics are you have to use the current bylaws to, To amend
Are
it.
you saying we need to figure out the process for calling the special meeting?
yes, that's what I'm unclear about.
Well, in the past, we've just
Can we
said,
just schedule
We're
it?
having.
yeah,
it,
you just
yeah,
say
we're
right
just
now you
having it.
want to meet and it's really not.
it's not
There's no
hard.
here,
I wasn't sure.
We just weren't sure and didn't want to.
I would like to
Yeah,
see
you
the
can just
hearing.
say.
Prefer.
Enough notice under coma to if we schedule.
So we were kind of looking at like 12 to 1 on June 26th. So it's a Wednesday, and then we would anticipate, going to the 5:30, Board of County Commission
That day.
meeting that night. So if that time is good for folks, then I can, and I think that this room is open that day, so
I think it makes sense. I mean, we want to finalize our contract with JMI. If they're gonna be here in person, that's perfect time to do it. And does anybody have any concerns about that? I think let's just plan it, the June 26th meeting from noon to 1.
And I already told Katie I have my board of directors meeting, so I will not be there that day.
That's not
I'll be-
acceptable.
What's that? Those are my bosses, sorry.
yeah, we have.
We've been hearing that the whole thing.
They're my bosses.
I know that there, we may have a couple end up having, because it's kind of a totally weird schedule. They have, a sheriff is gonna have to be virtual
Yeah.
that day. So if folks are here and can be in person, that is great. Otherwise, kind of join online, and I will get a meeting invitation out to everybody, at least just to hold the time, and I'll work with Robin to get like the Zoom link and all that such.
If I could just impress upon everyone, if you could just, we are almost to the end, but we've been pushing really hard. So we've got these last two sections, if you can just kind of on a time crunch. We're only gonna have an hour, I guess, to kind of figure it all out, and hopefully today we kind of see how, we've given you sort of the broad, what we try to do, what we've done so far, but if there's anything that you think is worrisome to you, or anything you really want to contribute, please do that, so that we can really push through these last 6 weeks or so to get it done, because I think we've made a lot of progress. And we can hopefully get it approved.
And when we sent out and requested feedback over those first couple of sections, we had asked, so if you have feedback, in particular, if you would share that, with email to, DA Valdez, Sheriff Armbruster, and then copy me on that. And I can kind of wrangle and collect all of that feedback. So,
You anticipate we'll see this ahead of that?
Oh,
yes,
100%.
yeah, you'll see at least one new version.
You're gonna start seeing it as we work through.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So you're probably gonna get multiple emails for feedback as we work through sections.
I feel great. Is there anything that you want, the next item is implementation, do we have anything more? we need to cover?
Yeah, the only other thing, I'm gonna skip sharing the slide, but, so once we have these, the bylaws should not generally, not just for this group, but for, as you all know, probably from other groups that, you're part of, the bylaws should be really in action, right? Moving, the next task before us will be kind of, how do we breathe life into these? We have had, I've had general conversations with, the work group, and also, JMI just to talk about, so kind of what, so now what? Like, we have new bylaws, and these are, in a lot of places noticeably different probably than what we've had before. And so now what? And so one of the things that I've asked JMI about is the potential for additional support to help kind of launch into moving these from a piece of paper that just kind of gets filed away on the website and shared as new members kind of rotate on, and into the actual document that guides how we, like, how do we show that we're doing this? Like, how do we do this? And so one of the things that the two big areas that I think are kind of big changes, the two things that I think are big changes for us will be around strategic planning, and then also this idea of an executive committee and kind of helping to best support this kind of new function, a new group of people. And so JMI has availability. If I want to get some thoughts from members about interest in shifting from this, once we complete this kind of current contract, kind of engaging with JMI around probably August-ish, helping to kind of start working with us in a different contract around strategic planning, establishing and kind of supporting, kind of helping us get off the ground an executive committee. So looking at a contract of maybe a year-ish. And ideally, if it seems right now they do have availability that they could support us with that. And that would help lead us into the executive committee being kind of successful. Like, if we think about January 2025 as kind of the next, a new iteration of CJCC, we have opportunity with JMI to help kind of ensure that that group and that we as a whole are kind of in a place to be successful. Don't have a lot of specifics around what that looks like, what that could look like, but I at least wanted to throw out the general idea to folks and just see if that's something that people may be interested in, and would be willing to kind of work with us if we did that. Or significant opposition, I'm open to that as well.
Yeah.
Thomas County's paying.
We have no money.
Since we have no money.
We have no money. We'd have to make a recommendation. to the county to do that.
Our foot is,
Yes,
Budget.
she does say that.
are there do people have, I saw a lot of like nodding heads, so I'm hoping that that means folks are open to seeing what that might look like.
Yes.
Sounds great.
I think that was all I was going to talk about on that part.
Next, we want to give an opportunity for CJCC members to provide agency updates. Do we have any updates anybody wants to share? Other than we're in the budget process, so there's not much to say.
So
Suzanne?
the DA annual report will be out, soon. We've had to take some time to, excuse me, really ensure that our data was correct after the breach of the judicial system and the e-filing and all that, because our system's tied into that. So took us a little longer than we had hoped, but it should come out in the coming days. So that's our annual report, and my goal is to have it out within the week or two. So I just want to let you all know that.
Thank you. Any other updates?
I'm talking about July.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then, do we have any, public comment or public questions from anybody attending? Do anybody have their hand raised? I can't see.
Should we ask Rob? Not here.
Is Rob-
Yeah, she.
Robin, is there anybody that has any public comment?
I have no one online.
Okay, thank you. So
Do we maybe want to ask them?
So before we adjourn, we talked about moving, I think Jessica talked about even months. So starting in June, we're gonna do the special meeting, and then we'll meet again in August, October, December. Is that, everybody's good with that? So
And
that's the even months.
And in the same, like, Second Tuesday, are we second Tuesday, like the same, second Tuesday?
Same time,
11th?
same place.
Different month.
month.
So I will adjust those on everybody's count. So y'all may get a whole bunch of us.
That's good though.
So, but I will go ahead and we'll just go ahead and swap. So then July, so our next meeting then would be
June
June
26th
26th
from
at
12 to
12,
1.
and
And then
most
after
likely
that,
in
we'll go
here.
back to the 11th to,
starting in
Starting
August,
in
the second
August.
Tuesday.
yeah. Is there anything else for the good of the order this afternoon? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. See you all next meeting, June 26th, Wednesday at 12 p.m. at this location.